You're standing in the middle of a job site. It's 7 a.m. The concrete truck is idling. Your crew is waiting. And you're staring at a set of drawings that show a column landing exactly where a window is supposed to go. The architect is still asleep. And you're the one who has to fix it. This is the moment that defines the relationship between architects and contractors. And it's a relationship that has been broken for a very long time. Let's be honest about something. Architects and contractors don't hate each other. Not really. But the system they work inside of makes it feel that way. The friction isn't personal, it's structural. And if you don't understand the structural friction, you will bleed money on every single project you touch. Here's the thing. Architects are trained to imagine buildings that don't exist yet. Contractors are trained to build buildings that do exist. One mind looks forward in time. The other mind looks at a physical reality right in front of them. The problem isn't the people. The problem is that these two modes of thinking are fundamentally incompatible. And no one teaches you how to bridge that gap. Think about it this way. On one side of the table, you have a designer who spent 5 years in school drawing perfect lines on trace paper. On the other side, you have a builder who spent 5 years on site learning that wood warps, concrete shrinks, and steel expands in the heat. One learned in a world of ideals, the other learned in a world of compromises. These two worlds don't speak the same language, but we expect them to build a building together, without fighting, without pointing fingers, without calling each other names behind closed doors. Does that sound realistic to you? Let's look at what actually happens on a typical project. The architect produces a set of construction documents. And here's the first truth you need to hear. The drawings are wrong. Every set of drawings is wrong. Not wrong in the sense that the architect is incompetent. Wrong in the sense that a drawing is a two-dimensional representation of a three-dimensional reality. And reality is messy. A drawing can show a wall framing detail that works perfectly in theory. But on site, the lumber is bowed. The concrete forms are slightly out of plumb. The steel beam is a 1/4 inch off from where the structural engineer calculated. And suddenly, that perfect detail doesn't fit. What happens next? The contractor picks up the phone. Or more likely, they send an RFI, a request for information. And this is where the relationship starts to crack. Here's what a typical RFI looks like. The contractor writes a question. The architect reads it. The architect doesn't have the time to answer it because they're already working on 3 other projects. The architect writes a response. The response creates 2 new problems. The contractor reads the response and has to ask a follow-up. And this cycle repeats for weeks, for months. On a big project, the number of RFIs can climb into the hundreds, and every single RFI costs money. It costs time, it costs trust. Dr. Glenn Ballard, a researcher at UC Berkeley and one of the founders of the Lean Construction Institute, studied this exact friction point. He found that a typical RFI takes about 12 days to close. That's 12 days where work stops. 12 days where you're paying your crew to stand around. 12 days where the architect is charging you hourly to answer the question they should have answered in the drawings. But here's the part that really hurts. Most RFIs aren't about complex engineering problems. They're about simple coordination issues. They're about the architect showing a duct where a beam goes. They're about the structural engineer placing a column right in the middle of a doorway. These are mistakes that could have been caught with a basic coordination review. And yet they happen on almost every single project. Now let's talk about what the architect is thinking. Because they're not the villain in this story either. The architect is under pressure. The client wants a beautiful building. The budget is tight. The schedule is compressed. The architect is responsible for coordinating 10 different consultants: structural, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, civil, landscape. Each one of those consultants produces their own set of drawings, and somewhere in that mountain of paper, things get missed. It's not incompetence, its complexity. A typical commercial building has thousands of connections. Each connection has to work. Each connection has to fit. Each connection has to be ordered and installed in the right sequence, and someone has to catch every single one of these connections before they turn into a problem on site. But the architect doesn't have that many eyes, and the contractor doesn't have that much patience. So what happens? The contractor builds it anyway. They find a workaround, they change the detail, they make it work. And this is where the resentment builds, because the contractor is now doing the architect's coordination work for free, on their own time, and at their own risk. Let me tell you what that risk looks like. You change a detail in the field. You think it's fine. You build it. 3 weeks later, the architect walks the job and sees what you've done. The architect says you've deviated from the drawings. The architect tells the owner that you made unauthorized changes. The owner wants the work ripped out and redone. And suddenly you're standing in the middle of an argument that could have been solved with one conversation. But the conversation never happened. Because the culture doesn't encourage conversations. It encourages documentation. It encourages blaming. It encourages hiding your mistakes. And that brings us to the second ugly truth about this relationship. Architects and contractors don't trust each other. And they have good reasons not to. From the contractor's perspective, the architect is someone who lives in a clean office, draws perfect lines, and has never actually been on a roof in August. From the architect's perspective, the contractor is someone who charges change orders for every problem, never reads the drawings, and builds everything wrong. Both of these stereotypes are unfair, and both of them persist because the job doesn't require architects and contractors to work together. It requires them to hand off information and walk away. That handoff is where the magic dies. Here's a question for you. If the people designing a building never talk to the people building a building, why are we surprised when the final product has problems? Now let's look at how this plays out financially. The average construction project in North America comes in about 25% over budget. That's not a small number. That's a number that destroys careers. That's a number that bankrupts developers. And a significant portion of that overrun comes directly from the architect-contractor relationship gap. When a contractor submits an RFI, they usually stop work in the affected area. That stop means idle labor, idle equipment, idle momentum, and every day of idle cost cascades into the rest of the schedule. The delay pushes other trades. The other trades get frustrated. The schedule collapses. And now you're paying overtime to catch up. All because a detail didn't fit. All because a question didn't get answered. All because two people with two different skill sets never learned how to talk to each other. Dr. Iris Tomerline, a professor at UC Berkeley and a leading researcher in construction management, documented this exact phenomenon in her study of production control in construction. She found that workflow interruptions caused by coordination failures account for up to 40% of lost productivity on a job site. 40%. That means you are effectively paying your crew to stand around for 2 days out of every 5. And most contractors have just accepted this as normal. They've built it into their overhead. They've priced it into their bids. They've learned to expect the chaos. But what if it doesn't have to be normal? Let's talk about what happens when architects and contractors actually work well together. Because it is possible, it just requires a different approach, a different mindset, and a different way of doing business. The most successful projects I've ever studied all share one thing in common. The architect and the contractor developed a relationship before the job started. They sat in a room together. They looked at the drawings together. They talked through every single coordination point before the first shovel went to the ground. This doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to be complicated. But it does have to happen. One of the most powerful tools for bridging this gap is called collaborative design review. It's a process where the architect and the contractor walk through the entire set of drawings together, room by room, element by element. The contractor points to every detail that doesn't make sense in the real world. The architect makes notes. Together, they resolve each issue before it hits the site. Does this take time? Yes. Does it cost money? Yes. But compare that cost to the cost of RFI delays and change orders and schedule overruns. The math works. It always works. Dr. Robert Leicht, a researcher at Penn State, studied the impact of early contractor involvement in design. His research found that when contractors are brought in during the design phase, RFIs drop by over 60%. Schedule delays shrink by nearly half. And the overall cost of the project comes in within budget much more consistently. But here's the thing. The construction industry doesn't do this. Not widely, not consistently, because architects are accustomed to working in isolation. Contractors are accustomed to working from handed-off drawings. And owners are accustomed to buying projects in pieces. And no one wants to change. You're part of this system. You felt its pain. And maybe you've started to believe that this is just how construction works. But it doesn't have to be. Now, here's the most dangerous part of the architect-contractor divide. The part that no one talks about. The part that hurts everyone. When the relationship breaks down, the contractor starts building defensively. You start documenting every issue in writing. You start writing long emails that create a paper trail. You start withholding information that could help the architect because you're afraid it will be used against you. And the architect does the same thing. Everyone starts covering their tracks. And in that defensive culture, no one solves problems. Everyone just documents who caused them. This is death for a project. Death for the budget. Death for the schedule. And death for any hope of a good building at the end. Think about the buildings you've worked on where the relationship was toxic. Did the final product feel good? Did you drive away proud of what you built? Or did you drive away exhausted and relieved that it was finally over? If you're honest with yourself, you know the answer. So let's reframe this. Not as a problem to fix, but as an opportunity to seize. The construction industry is changing. It has to change. Labor shortages are getting worse, material costs are rising, schedules are getting tighter, and owners are demanding more for less money. You can't afford to lose 40% of your productivity to coordination failures. You can't afford to lose days waiting for RFI responses. You can't afford to keep building defensively. The best contractors and architects of the next decade will be the ones who figure this out. They'll be the ones who learn to collaborate before the conflict starts. They'll be the ones who treat the design-builder relationship not as a liability, but as a competitive advantage. You already know how to build. You already know how to read drawings. You already know how to manage a crew and schedule a job and deal with the 1,000 small crises that happen every day. The next step isn't learning a new skill. It's learning a new habit. Call your architect before the job starts. Ask them to walk the drawings with you. Tell them about the last time you got burned by a bad detail. Ask them about the last time a contractor surprised them with an unauthorized change. Share the honest version of who you are and what you need, and then listen to what they say. Because the people on the other side of the table aren't your enemy. They're just as stressed as you are. They're just as worried about the schedule. They're just as terrified of the owner's phone calls. And they're just as desperate for a project that goes well. The only thing standing between you and a better project is your willingness to stop treating each other like opponents. So, the next time you pick up a set of drawings and find a detail that doesn't work, don't fire off an RFI. Don't send a passive-aggressive email. Don't build it wrong and hope no one notices. Just pick up the phone and call the architect. They're probably sitting at their desk staring at a detail that doesn't work either. And maybe, if both of you are honest about what you actually need, you can solve it together. Before the truck arrives. Before the crew gets frustrated. Before the schedule starts to slip. Before the relationship gets another crack in its foundation. Because a building is never just a building. It's a collection of relationships. And the most important one is the one between the person who designed it and the person who built it. Get that relationship right, and everything else gets easier. You already know how to build. Now learn how to connect.